You're not like other women, not because you are louder, sharper, or harder to forget, but because you leave without noise. You don't slam doors to prove your pain. You don't announce your departure as a performance. You don't demand an audience for your grief. When something inside you knows it's time, you listen. And that quiet listening is not weakness, it is courage in its most grounded form. Quiet leaving is a form of courage because it asks you to trust yourself without witnesses. It requires an inner steadiness that doesn't depend on applause, agreement, or validation. When you leave without noise, you are choosing to honor your truth even when no one is clapping, even when the room remains unchanged, even when your absence is the only statement you make. That kind of courage is deeply internal. It is the bravery of knowing what you feel, believing what you know, and acting on it without turning your pain into a spectacle. Most people associate courage with confrontation, raised voices, final speeches, dramatic endings. But quiet courage is different. It lives in restraint. It shows up when you resist the urge to explain yourself to people who have already decided not to understand you. It is the moment you realize that being seen is not the same as being safe, and that sometimes the strongest move is to step away rather than prove a point. Quiet leaving means you choose peace over persuasion. This kind of departure doesn't happen suddenly. It is preceded by long periods of self-questioning, reflection, and emotional labor. You stay present longer than is comfortable. You attempt repair. You communicate clearly. You carry hope carefully, even when it begins to feel heavy. By the time you leave, you are not reacting, you are responding. That distinction matters. Reaction is fueled by emotion. Response is guided by self-respect. Quiet leaving is what happens when your nervous system finally feels calm enough to choose itself. There is also grief in quiet courage. You grieve the version of the future you once imagined. You grieve the effort you invested. You grieve the parts of yourself that tried to make it work. But instead of demanding that grief be witnessed, you hold it gently. You let it move through you without turning it into blame. That is not avoidance. It is emotional responsibility. You understand that not every ending requires a villain to be real. Quiet leaving can feel invisible, and that invisibility can be painful. People may misunderstand your silence as indifference. They may assume you didn't care because you didn't fight loudly. But the truth is often the opposite. You cared enough to handle the ending with integrity. You cared enough not to let anger define your exit. You cared enough to leave without burning everything down. Courage in this form is choosing alignment over attachment. It is recognizing when staying costs you more than leaving ever could. It is trusting that your worth does not increase by enduring what diminishes you. Quiet leaving says, I can love deeply and still walk away. It says, I don't need chaos to prove my pain. It says, I honor myself enough to leave gently, even when it hurts. In the end, quiet courage is about self-loyalty. It is about listening to the soft inner voice that says, this no longer fits, and respecting it before resentment takes over. It is the courage to end something with grace, to choose yourself without noise, and to walk forward carrying wisdom instead of regret. Self-respect speaks louder than drama because it does not need volume to be felt. It doesn't rely on conflict, confrontation, or chaos to prove its existence. Self-respect is steady. It shows up in how you pause before reacting, in how you choose not to explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you, and in how you refuse to abandon your values just to be heard. Where drama demands attention, self-respect commands presence. Drama often comes from a place of unprocessed pain. It is the outward expression of feeling unseen, dismissed, or powerless. When someone is deeply hurt and doesn't feel safe being vulnerable, drama becomes a substitute for honesty. But self-respect grows when you learn to sit with your emotions without letting them take control of your behavior. It is the moment you realize that not every feeling needs an audience and not every injustice needs a reaction. Sometimes the most powerful response is restraint. Choosing self-respect means choosing regulation over reactivity. It means understanding that raising your voice will not raise your worth. You stop trying to win arguments that cost you your peace. You stop performing your pain in the hope that someone will finally understand how much it hurt. Instead, you let your actions speak. You let consistency, boundaries, and calm decisions tell the story you no longer need to narrate. There is strength in walking away without making the other person the villain. Self-respect allows you to acknowledge harm without turning it into a public trial. You don't need to destroy someone's character to validate your own experience. You trust that your truth stands on its own. This doesn't mean you deny your pain. It means you refuse to let it turn you into someone you don't recognize. You protect your integrity, even when you are hurting. Drama often promises relief, but it rarely delivers peace. It may feel empowering in the moment, but it usually leaves behind regret, exhaustion, and fractured self-trust. Self-respect, on the other hand, is quieter but longer lasting. It gives you the ability to look back on difficult endings and know you handled them with grace. It allows you to move forward without needing to rewrite the past or justify your choices to everyone who questions them. When you choose self-respect, you accept that not everyone will understand your silence. Some people expect explanations, emotional reactions, or visible struggle. But self-respect is not about meeting expectations, it's about meeting yourself. It's about knowing when your energy is better spent on healing than on proving a point. You recognize that peace is not passive, it is intentional. Self-respect speaks louder than drama because it is rooted in self-trust. It says, "I know who I am even if you don't." It allows you to leave conversations unfinished, relationships unrescued, and situations unexplainable to those who were never listening. In the end, self-respect isn't loud, but it echoes. It shows in the way you carry yourself, in the boundaries you maintain, and in the calm certainty that you no longer need chaos to feel powerful. You grieve before you go, long before anyone notices you pulling away. The grief begins quietly, while you are still showing up, still trying, still hoping that something will change. It lives in the moments where you pause before speaking, where you lower your expectations just enough to protect your heart, where you feel the weight of effort going unreturned. This kind of grief is private and slow. It is the mourning of what you wanted something to become and the growing awareness that it may never be that. Grieving before you leave means you do not exit abruptly. You stay present through disappointment. You give space for repair. You revisit conversations in your mind, asking yourself if you were clear enough, patient enough, loving enough. You wrestle with self-doubt and loyalty at the same time. Part of you wants to hold on, while another part is learning to let go. That internal conflict is exhausting, but it is also honest. It shows that you did not leave carelessly. This grief is not loud. It doesn't announce itself in ultimatums or threats. It shows up as quiet tears, long silences, and the subtle pulling back of your emotional investment. You begin to detach in small, almost invisible ways. You stop over-explaining. You stop asking for more than the other person is willing to give. You stop fighting for something that keeps asking you to abandon yourself. Each small withdrawal is a form of self-protection, and each one carries its own sadness. By the time you leave, much of the mourning has already happened. You are not numb, you are resolved. You have already cried the tears you needed to cry. You have already faced the truth you were avoiding. That is why your departure surprises people. They didn't see the nights you spent processing, the courage it took to admit that love alone was not enough, or the strength it required to accept reality instead of potential. What looks sudden to them has been unfolding inside you for a long time. Grieving before you go allows you to leave with clarity rather than chaos. You are not driven by rage or desperation. You are guided by acceptance. Acceptance does not mean the pain disappears. It means you stop arguing with what is. You understand that staying would mean shrinking, and leaving, though painful, means honoring yourself. This understanding creates a quiet firmness that doesn't need explanation. There is also compassion in grieving before you go. You are able to hold the good and the bad at the same time. You don't erase the love that existed just because it couldn't sustain you. You don't need to demonize the other person to justify your exit. You simply recognize that something can be meaningful and still not be meant to continue. You grieve before you go so that when you finally leave, you can walk forward without bitterness. You carry lessons instead of resentment, insight instead of regret. The grief you processed becomes the foundation of your healing. And in that quiet, resolved leaving, you honor not only what was lost, but also the self you refused to lose in the process. Boundaries don't need announcements because they are not requests for permission. They are expressions of self-respect. A boundary is not a speech you deliver or a warning you issue. It is a decision you make and consistently live by. When you truly understand your limits, you stop explaining them excessively. You stop rehearsing your reasons. You let your actions do the talking, trusting that the people who respect you will feel the shift without needing a detailed explanation. Many of us were taught that boundaries must be justified to be valid. We learned to soften them, over-explain them, or apologize for them so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable. But real boundaries are not meant to manage other people's emotions. They are meant to protect your own well-being. When you announce them loudly, they can become invitations for negotiation. When you embody them quietly, they become non-negotiable. Quiet boundaries show up in small, consistent choices. You return calls when you have the capacity, not out of obligation. You stop engaging in conversations that drain or disrespect you. You leave situations earlier than you used to. You no longer chase clarity from people who thrive on confusion. These shifts may seem subtle, but they are powerful. They communicate self-trust and emotional maturity far more clearly than any confrontation ever could. There is discomfort in not announcing your boundaries, especially if you are used to being misunderstood. Silence can be misread as passivity, withdrawal, or indifference. But silence, in this context, is intentional. It is the decision not to argue for your right to exist in peace. You recognize that people who benefit from your lack of boundaries will often resist them the most. You don't need to convince them, you just need to be consistent. Boundaries without announcements also protect your energy. Explaining yourself repeatedly can become another form of emotional labor, especially when the listener is not genuinely open. You begin to see that clarity is not always about better communication. Sometimes it's about better discernment. You learn who deserves access to your inner world and who only deserves polite distance. This doesn't mean you never speak up. It means you speak when it's necessary and stay silent when words would only invite more harm. You choose response over reaction. You understand that your behavior teaches people how to treat you more effectively than any boundary-setting script ever could. When you stop showing up for what hurts you, that absence becomes the boundary. Boundaries that don't need announcements are rooted in self-respect, not fear. They come from knowing your worth, not from trying to control someone else's behavior. You are no longer waiting for understanding to feel justified. You are no longer asking for permission to protect yourself. You simply act in alignment with what you know is healthy for you. In the end, boundaries don't need to be loud to be strong. They don't need witnesses to be real. They are felt in the calm that replaces chaos, in the space you reclaim for yourself, and in the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you honored your limits without needing to explain them to anyone. Peace can be more disruptive than anger because it refuses to play the role people expect you to perform. Anger is familiar. It fits the script. When someone anticipates a confrontation, raised voices, or emotional reactions, anger gives them something to push against. Peace, on the other hand, offers no grip. It doesn't escalate. It doesn't defend itself loudly. It simply exists, and that can be deeply unsettling to those who are used to chaos as a form of control. Anger often validates other people's assumptions. It confirms that the situation is dramatic, that emotions are volatile, that the relationship is still engaged in conflict. Peace disrupts this narrative. When you respond calmly, when you stop arguing, when you disengage without resentment, you change the entire emotional dynamic. The absence of reaction forces others to sit with themselves, and many people find that far more uncomfortable than a fight. There are individuals who rely on emotional intensity to feel powerful or relevant. They know how to navigate chaos. They are skilled at provoking reactions, redirecting blame, and keeping situations emotionally charged. When you meet them with peace, you remove their leverage. You no longer participate in the cycle. This can feel threatening to those who are accustomed to connection through conflict. Your calm exposes the pattern without ever naming it. Choosing peace is not the same as suppressing emotion. It is not indifference or avoidance. Peace is often the result of deep emotional processing. It comes after you have felt the anger fully, examined it honestly, and decided not to let it drive your behavior. This choice requires strength. It asks you to regulate your nervous system rather than discharge it onto someone else. That kind of regulation is rare and powerful. Peace is disruptive because it signals resolution. It says, I am no longer trying to change you. It says, I accept what this is and I am choosing myself. For people who expect endless negotiation, emotional bargaining, or dramatic closure, this can feel like abandonment. They may interpret your calm as coldness because they are used to equating intensity with care. But peace is not the absence of feeling. It is the presence of clarity. When you choose peace, you also disrupt your own patterns. You break the habit of proving your pain. You stop rehearsing arguments in your head. You release the need to be right in order to be whole. This internal disruption is transformative. It creates space for healing, creativity, and grounded decision-making. You begin to respond from alignment rather than from woundedness. Peace changes the power dynamic. Anger keeps you emotionally tethered to the very thing that hurt you. Peace loosens that bond. It allows you to step back without resentment, to disengage without punishment. That freedom can feel threatening to those who benefited from your emotional investment. Your calm becomes a mirror they didn't ask for. In the end, peace is disruptive because it ends the cycle. It doesn't argue, explain, or retaliate. It simply chooses a different way. And in a world that expects noise, your quiet resolution becomes the most powerful statement you could make. Leaving quietly is choosing yourself in a world that often rewards endurance over honesty. It is the moment you stop measuring your worth by how much you can tolerate and start honoring what you actually need. This choice is rarely impulsive. It is born from long reflection, repeated attempts, and a deep internal reckoning with the truth you may have tried to soften for too long. When you leave quietly, you are not giving up. You are finally listening. Choosing yourself through a quiet departure means you no longer need your pain to be validated by spectacle. You stop trying to make others see what they refuse to acknowledge while you were still present. You understand that your healing does not require agreement, apology, or closure from outside of you. The decision to leave becomes an act of self-loyalty, not rebellion. It is grounded, calm, and deeply personal. Quiet leaving often comes after you have learned that explaining yourself does not always create understanding. Some people hear your words but never feel your truth. In those moments, continuing to explain becomes another way of abandoning yourself. Choosing to leave without noise is choosing to conserve your energy for rebuilding rather than defending. It is a recognition that peace is more valuable than being right. There is a tenderness in leaving quietly. You are honoring the parts of you that tried, hoped, and cared deeply. You are not erasing the love or effort that existed. You are simply acknowledging that love alone cannot sustain something that requires you to shrink. Choosing yourself does not mean you stop caring, it means you stop self-betraying. Leaving quietly also reflects emotional maturity. It shows that you can hold complexity without turning it into conflict. You can accept that something meaningful can also be incomplete. You don't need to punish, accuse, or dramatize the ending to make it real. Your clarity is enough. Your decision is enough. This kind of self-choice can feel lonely. There may be no applause, no dramatic closure, no clear villain. Others may misunderstand your silence as weakness or indifference, but inside there is a growing sense of alignment. You feel yourself returning to yourself. The noise fades, and in that quiet, you rediscover your inner voice, the one that has been asking for safety, respect, and honesty all along. Choosing yourself by leaving quietly is also an act of trust. You trust that your life will expand beyond this ending. You trust that you don't need to fight to prove your value. You trust that what is meant for you will not require you to abandon your integrity to keep it. That trust becomes the foundation of your next chapter. In the end, leaving quietly is not about disappearing. It is about arriving back to yourself. It is about choosing growth over attachment, peace over performance, and self-respect over survival. You walk away without noise not because you have nothing to say, but because you finally know who you are, and that knowing no longer needs to shout.